At approximately 7:45 p.m. on Sunday, November 12, 2024, 3 gunshots echoed through the typically quiet neighborhood of Pine Circle in Alpine, Texas. The sounds originated from the Hawthorne family home, where Pastor Gerald Hawthorne, his son Malcolm, and daughter Keisha had gathered around the dining table for their regular Sunday dinner following evening church service. According to police reports, the first responders arrived within minutes of receiving multiple 911 calls from alarmed neighbors. What they discovered inside the home would shock the small West Texas community for years to come. "We entered to find 3 victims with fatal gunshot wounds positioned around the dining table," stated one officer. Food was still warm on their plates. Each victim had sustained a single gunshot wound to the chest. The precision of the shots suggested a calculated attack rather than a crime of passion. Pastor Gerald Hawthorne was found slumped over in his chair at the head of the table, while his children, Malcolm and Keisha, remained in their seats, their bodies still upright, suggesting they had little time to react. The Bible that Gerald habitually kept beside him during family meals lay open, spattered with blood. The first officers on scene encountered Delilah Hawthorne, the pastor's wife and mother of the deceased children, in the garage. According to court documents, she was attempting to start her vehicle when police detained her. A 9mm handgun registered in her name was recovered from her purse, later confirmed through ballistics to be the murder weapon. She was eerily calm. As news spread through Alpine, a town of fewer than 6,000 residents, the immediate question on everyone's mind was, why? Why would Delilah Hawthorne, the respected wife of a beloved pastor and mother of 2 accomplished teenagers, commit such a horrific act against her own family? The investigation would soon uncover a web of secrets spanning 3 generations of the Hawthorne family. Secrets so devastating that Delilah apparently believed murder was preferable to their exposure. In the months before that fateful Sunday evening in November, the Hawthorne family had been the picture of respectability in their community. To those who attended their church, the Hawthornes represented everything a Christian family should be: devout, successful, and seemingly perfect. Pastor Gerald Hawthorne had led his congregation for nearly 15 years, taking over from his father, Franklin, who had stepped down but remained an influential elder in the church. His congregants described him as a man who practiced what he preached. At least, that's what they believed. Pastor Gerald would spend hours with families in crisis, recalled a church elder during police interviews. That's what makes all this so hard to comprehend. Delilah Hawthorne had married Gerald in her early 20s, shortly after he'd taken over the pulpit. She was active in every aspect of church life. "She always had time for everyone," said a longtime church member. If you needed advice or prayer, Delilah would drop everything to help. She seemed so devoted to Gerald and those children. Their son, Malcolm, was a first-year pre-seminary student at Sul Ross State University, remaining close to home at his parents' urging. He was following in his father's footsteps. Tall and charismatic like his grandfather Franklin, he was popular among the congregation's young adults. Keisha, their high-achieving 17-year-old daughter, led the church youth choir and maintained perfect grades at Alpine High School. She was quieter than her brother but respected for her maturity and dedication. What the congregation didn't see was how carefully curated this image truly was. Behind the polished exterior of Sunday services and community events, the Hawthorne family was fractured in ways few could imagine. According to Elias Hawthorne, Gerald's younger brother, who had moved to Houston years earlier, the family dynamics had always been strained. "Franklin was impossible to please," Elias told investigators after the murders. "Gerald spent his whole life trying to measure up to our father's expectations. That pressure created cracks nobody outside the family could see. Those cracks had begun to widen in the weeks before the murders. What the church members, friends, and even the Hawthorne children didn't know was that the foundation of their family was built on secrets so devastating that Gerald Hawthorne would soon discover the truth, and pay for that knowledge with his life. The investigation into the Hawthorne family murders took a disturbing turn when Margaret Hawthorne, Gerald's mother, provided investigators with a worn leather journal she had maintained for nearly 20 years. The journal, later entered into evidence as Exhibit 17B, contained meticulously documented accounts of Franklin Hawthorne's inappropriate behavior with female church members dating back to the early 2000s. Franklin wasn't just a pastor, Margaret explained in her official statement to detectives. He was a predator who used his position to pursue vulnerable women. I started documenting everything after the third incident because I knew nobody would believe me without proof. According to court records, Franklin Hawthorne had been asked to step down from his pastoral position following multiple complaints from female congregants. Though the official announcement cited health concerns, internal church documents revealed that church elders had confronted Franklin about his inappropriate relationships with choir members and women seeking counseling. Margaret's journal detailed at least 7 different women who had confided in her about Franklin's advances. Each entry included dates, locations, and specific behaviors that painted a disturbing picture of systematic predation. Despite this evidence, Franklin remained a respected figure in the community, his reputation largely intact. The most damning revelation came from Delilah Hawthorne's personal correspondence, discovered on her laptop after her arrest. Emails between Delilah and a close friend from college revealed that her relationship with Franklin began just 3 months after her marriage to Gerald. "He cornered me in the storage room after everyone had left," Delilah wrote in one email. "Said he could tell I wasn't satisfied with Gerald. Said he could show me what a real man was like. I should have been disgusted, but I didn't say no." What began as a single encounter evolved into a calculated affair that spanned years. According to Margaret's testimony, Franklin would often create reasons to visit the house when Gerald was away at pastoral conferences or counseling sessions. Cell phone records showed hundreds of text messages between Franklin and Delilah, often exchanged late at night or during times when Gerald was known to be occupied with church duties. The relationship took a dramatic turn when Delilah discovered she was pregnant. DNA evidence recovered during the investigation would later confirm what Margaret had suspected for years. Malcolm Hawthorne was not Gerald's biological son, but Franklin's. "I confronted her when she announced the pregnancy," Margaret stated in her deposition. "She didn't deny it. She just looked at me and said, 'Gerald will never know the difference.' The coldness in her eyes, I'll never forget it." Gerald Hawthorne, by all accounts, had no suspicion that his firstborn son was not his biological child. Friends and family described his joy at becoming a father, his dedication to raising Malcolm, and his pride as the boy grew to resemble his grandfather, a resemblance that tragically held the truth in plain sight. The affair between Franklin and Delilah continued intermittently for years, always carefully concealed from Gerald, who remained devoted to both his ministry and his family, unaware of the betrayal occurring under his own roof. While the revelation of Franklin Hawthorne's relationship with his daughter-in-law sent shockwaves through the investigation, detectives soon uncovered an even more troubling development. The second layer of betrayal came from within the immediate family, Gerald's younger brother, Elias Hawthorne. According to court records, Elias Hawthorne had moved to Houston in 2005, allegedly to pursue better job opportunities. However, interviews with former employers revealed a pattern of unstable employment and increasingly erratic behavior. A background check showed 3 misdemeanor charges for disorderly conduct and a DUI between 2005 and 2010. The turning point in Elias's relationship with the family occurred in late 2006. Cell phone records recovered during the investigation showed a dramatic increase in calls between Elias and Delilah around this time. Initially, investigators suspected a romantic relationship, but the truth proved far more calculated. According to a 10-page letter Elias wrote to Gerald from prison, he had discovered Delilah and Franklin's affair by accident. "I came back to Alpine unannounced that weekend to borrow money from Dad," Elias wrote. "I walked into the storage shed behind his house looking for tools and found them together. She wasn't struggling. She wasn't crying. She was a willing participant." Police recovered a series of text messages from Delilah's old phone backup that corroborated this timeline. Elias's blackmail was explicit. According to his confession letter, he initially demanded $10,000 to keep silent. When Delilah claimed she couldn't access that much money without Gerald noticing, Elias suggested an alternative form of payment. "He told me either I sleep with him once, or he'd tell Gerald everything," Delilah admitted in her post-arrest interview. "I made a calculated decision. One night with Elias seemed like a small price to keep my marriage and reputation intact." The encounter took place at a motel outside Alpine while Gerald was at a pastoral conference in Dallas. What neither Delilah nor Elias anticipated was the pregnancy that resulted from this coerced encounter. 2 months later, Delilah discovered she was pregnant with Keisha. "I knew immediately it wasn't Gerald's," Delilah stated in her confession. "We hadn't been intimate in weeks due to his travel schedule, but I convinced him the timing worked. He never questioned it." Elias's demands stopped after the encounter, but his life continued to spiral downward. Court records show that he was arrested for his involvement in a convenience store robbery that resulted in the clerk's death some years after his affair with Delilah. Though Elias wasn't the shooter, his participation earned him a 15-year prison sentence. "The irony wasn't lost on me," Elias wrote in his confession letter. "I helped create a child I would never know while blackmailing my sister-in-law over a child that wasn't my brother's. We're all going to hell for what we did to Gerald." Prison visitation logs show that neither Gerald nor Delilah ever visited Elias during his incarceration. It wasn't until his 8th year in prison, following a near-fatal stabbing by another inmate, that Elias's conscience finally compelled him to write the confession letter that would eventually reach his brother. The letter obtained by investigators from Gerald's home office following the murders methodically detailed both Elias's blackmail of Delilah and the earlier affair between Delilah and Franklin Hawthorne. Elias included specific dates, locations, and details that could be independently verified. According to prison records, Elias mailed the letter through the prison's regular mail system. Delivery confirmation showed it reached the Hawthorne residence. Gerald's bank records revealed that 2 days later, he purchased DNA testing kits from an online genetic testing company. Detectives recovered the DNA test results from Gerald's home office. The files confirmed that Gerald Hawthorne was not the biological father of either Malcolm or Keisha. The probability of paternity was less than 0.01% for both children. Cell phone records showed that following receipt of the DNA results, Gerald made 3 calls to his brother at the state prison. Each call lasted the maximum allowed 15 minutes. Prison recording logs indicated that these calls were unusually emotional, with Gerald repeatedly asking Elias for more details about what he had witnessed. According to Margaret Hawthorne's testimony, Gerald had become increasingly withdrawn from family gatherings, finding excuses to avoid Sunday dinners with his parents. "He couldn't look at his father," Margaret stated. When they were in the same room, Gerald would physically position himself as far from Franklin as possible. On the evening of November 10, 2024, 2 days before the murders, Gerald was called away to visit an ailing church member. Security camera footage from the Hawthorne property showed him leaving in haste, departing directly from his home office where he had been reviewing documents. Camera footage also captured Delilah entering his office approximately 11 minutes after his departure. According to her later confession to police, this was when she discovered both Elias's letter and the DNA test results, which Gerald had left open on his desk. Phone records show Delilah made 3 calls that night, one to a hardware store inquiring about their hours, one to a chemical supply company that went unanswered, and one to her children, asking them to come to dinner on Sunday, no matter what. A receipt recovered from Delilah's purse revealed a $420 cash purchase at an unlicensed chemical supply store in neighboring Marfa, Texas. The proprietor, who later testified under immunity, confirmed selling her a colorless, odorless compound typically used in laboratory settings that becomes lethal in sufficient dosage. She specifically asked for something that wouldn't alter the taste of food, the supplier stated in his deposition. She claimed it was for a science demonstration. The poison attempt failed due to a critical miscalculation. Toxicology reports indicated that the substance Delilah purchased required an empty stomach to achieve lethal effects. The forensic analysis of the meal, pot roast with potatoes, vegetables, and dinner rolls, revealed that the heavy, starchy food neutralized much of the compound's potency. Security camera footage from inside the Hawthorne home, obtained through a search warrant, showed Delilah repeatedly checking her watch during dinner, then excusing herself after approximately 18 minutes when it became clear her primary plan had failed. Delilah returned to the dining room, the gun concealed behind the folds of her dress. The autopsy report confirmed that all 3 victims were shot from a standing position approximately 4 feet away from the table. Ballistics analysis revealed that Malcolm, seated to Gerald's right, was shot second. The autopsy showed defensive wounds on his forearms, indicating he had raised his arms in protection. Keisha, seated across from him, was the final victim. According to the medical examiner's report, all three died within minutes from catastrophic blood loss. Following the shooting, surveillance footage showed Delilah wiping the gun with a napkin before placing it in her purse. She then proceeded directly to the garage, where officers apprehended her minutes later. News of the Hawthorne family murders spread rapidly through Alpine, Texas. According to police records, Margaret Hawthorne, Gerald's mother, was notified of the tragedy at 8:37 p.m. She wasn't at her residence when the news reached her. She collapsed upon hearing the news, requiring medical attention from paramedics on standby. Franklin Hawthorne, meanwhile, had been informed of the crime earlier through a friend's call. At his residence, neighbors reported hearing a single gunshot echo from the bathroom. After forcing entry, officers discovered Franklin Hawthorne dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head, a .38 revolver still in his hand. A handwritten note recovered from the bathroom counter contained only 5 words: "I created this. I'm sorry." Forensic analysis confirmed it was Franklin Hawthorne's handwriting, though the brevity of the message left investigators with more questions than answers. Margaret Hawthorne was hospitalized following the double trauma of her son's murder and husband's suicide. Hospital records indicated she suffered a mild heart attack upon hearing about Franklin's death. During her 5-day hospital stay, she provided investigators with what would become the most comprehensive explanation of the family's dark history. Margaret Hawthorne's statement was approximately 8 hours long, spread across 3 days. According to the transcripts of Margaret's statement, she had known about Franklin's affair with Delilah since it began, 3 months after her marriage to Gerald. "I caught them together in Franklin's study," she stated. It wasn't the first time he'd pursued a younger woman. He had a pattern with female church members that had already caused problems. Margaret revealed that Franklin had been forced to step down from his pastoral position after multiple women came forward with complaints of inappropriate behavior. "The church covered it up," she explained. "Called it health issues to save face." But at least 5 women had reported him for making advances during counseling sessions. When asked why she hadn't exposed the affair between Franklin and Delilah, Margaret's answer revealed the extent of the abuse within the family. "He threatened to kill me if I ever told Gerald," she stated. "He showed me the gun he kept in his nightstand and said he'd make it look like a break-in. After many years of marriage, I knew he wasn't bluffing." Hospital records noted Margaret's elevated stress levels during this portion of her testimony. According to the attending nurse's notes, she required sedation after describing the threats in detail. Margaret also confirmed she had suspected Franklin was Malcolm's biological father. The timing of the pregnancy, the way Franklin doted on the boy, the physical resemblances that became more obvious as Malcolm grew older. "I knew, but I couldn't say anything." The most shocking revelation came when Margaret described her discovery of Elias's involvement. According to Margaret, she had attempted to hint to Gerald about the children's true parentage on multiple occasions. "I would say things like how Malcolm had his grandfather's eyes, or how Keisha reminded me of Elias at that age. I hoped Gerald would start asking questions, but he never caught on. He trusted his wife completely." 3 days after completing her statement, Margaret Hawthorne suffered a massive heart attack in her hospital room. Despite resuscitation efforts, she was pronounced dead. The medical examiner attributed her death to stress-induced cardiac arrest, officially listing it as a secondary consequence of the homicides. After a 3-week trial, Delilah Hawthorne was found guilty on 3 counts of first-degree murder. According to court transcripts, she remained expressionless as the judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. "In my 22 years on the bench, I have never encountered a case with such calculated cruelty," the judge stated during sentencing. The defendant executed her family not out of passion, but out of self-preservation. Prosecutors presented 47 pieces of evidence, including the security footage, DNA tests, Elias's confession letter, and Margaret's deathbed testimony. Defense attorneys attempted to argue diminished capacity due to psychological trauma, but the jury deliberated for only 6 hours before returning a unanimous guilty verdict. The Alpine community struggled to process the tragedy. Church attendance dropped by 68%, according to local reports, with many former congregants unable to reconcile their faith with the horrors that had occurred within the Hawthorne family. "How do we trust anything anymore?" questioned a former church member. "These people were our moral guides, our examples of godly living. Now we learn it was all built on lies and murder." Questions remained unanswered despite the conviction. Why had Margaret never found the courage to reveal the truth, even when threatened? How had Gerald failed to notice the patterns of behavior in his own home? Could the tragedy have been prevented if Franklin had been exposed years earlier? In her only public statement, delivered through her attorney, Delilah Hawthorne offered no apology, claiming instead that, "No one truly understands what I endured for decades." Prison records indicated she refused all visitors, including counselors and clergy. The Hawthorne family murders became a dividing line in the town's history. Before and after the Sunday when Delilah Hawthorne picked up a gun and ended 3 lives to protect a secret that, in the end, could not stay buried.